Hello learners, welcome to this second module on impacts of natural hazards and disasters part 1. This forms a part of MEV 002 Environmental and Occupational Hazards. I introduce myself as Dr. Sushmitha Baskar, working in the discipline of Environmental Studies in the School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies, Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. Let us now see the objectives of this module. After listening to this module, you should be able to define the impacts of natural hazards and disasters. Now, let us first discuss the effects of the natural hazards. So, in the previous talk, you have understood the type of natural hazards, the classification of the natural hazards, some technological hazards along with a case study, and how the primary, secondary and the tertiary effects, like what are these hazards and how they can be caused. Now, the natural hazards have the potential to cause a number of primary, secondary and the tertiary effects. We will see this in detail. The tropical cyclones, for example, they can bring strong winds and heavy rains which cause secondary hazards such as flood, storm, the landslides and also water pollution. So, cyclones can bring about all these problems. Now, if we take an example as flood, this can inundate areas, it can in turn lead to landslides, to erosions, to water quality deterioration and the turbidity of the waters. Turbidity means you would have seen that it appears, the water which normally is transparent, it appears turbid. So, the light penetration will not be there and it appears as a muddled liquid, as well as sediment deposition. So, just due to one flood you may have all these environmental quality deterioration and the problems. In the same way, severe storms, they can range from isolated thunderstorms to low intense, that is to intense low pressure systems producing phenomena such as severe winds, heavy rain, lightning, flood, storm tide and the coastal erosion. So, flood and the storms, you can see that if the primary effect is the flood or the storm, then these could be the other effects that also can be caused to a certain area or a region. Some more examples like a landslide, this can block a water course and again this can lead to flooding and debris flow upstream. Earthquakes, this can bring about fire, flood, water pollution, landslides, tsunamis and soil liquefaction. All this can be devastating as much as the primary hazard. Now, each of these hazards and each of these phenomena, they may produce significant physical, social as well as economic effects. So, what are the effects of the primary hazards? So, if it is a primary effect, they can occur as a result of the process itself. So, the examples are like water damage due to a flood, building collapse due to earthquake, landslides, hurricane or tornado. So, these are the primary effects and they occur as a result of the process itself. Secondary effects, so as the name indicates, they are secondary. They occur only because the primary effect has caused them. For example, fires that are ignited by earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, disruption of the power supply and the water surface as a result of the earthquake or flood. In the same way, flooding and the effects due to the landslides and also landslide moving into a lake or a river. So, these are some secondary effects which are caused only because the primary hazard has made them to do so, or it is due to the primary effect and these are being caused. Also, there are tertiary effects. These are the long term effects and are set off as a result again of the primary event. And this, as I told you, it is a long term effect because there can be loss of habitat. So, an entire area can be devoid of the crop or the plant growth and the habitat just because of floods. There can be agricultural crop failure because of volcanic eruption. So, that entire land can actually go dry. There can be positive environmental as well as social benefits. So, the bush fires are one example that I can cite, and the bush fires are fires that burn through areas of bushland. They are a type of wildfire, fires that burn through the wild vegetation like woodland, scrubland, grassland or savannas. These fires are unpredictable and difficult to control. Bushfires can also stimulate the growth and regenerate forest ecology, as the heat from fire is required for some seeds to germinate. So, certain seeds actually they require some heat and fire, and only then they will germinate and come out into the new plants. So, these are some examples of the positive benefits of these hazards. For example, floodplains, they are also an area and a source for recreational activity. So, a floodplain is generally it is a flat area of land next to a river or a stream, and it stretches from the banks of the river to the outer edges of the valley. These are picturesque places. If you have ever been to the floodplains, they are beautiful places for recreational activity, for picnic, for family outings and ecotourism, and they can bring relief for people and ecosystems suffering from prolonged drought. So, floodplains are a place for recreational activity. Ash from the volcanoes. Volcanic ash, so this is supposed to produce rich soils, and they can grow 3 crops per year in the tropics, and floodplains provide easily cultivated agricultural land close to a water supply. So, the benefits of the ash from these volcanoes, that they produce the rich soils and they can have a good agricultural crop production. So, these were some of the positive benefits. Now, natural hazards have also impacted civilizations. They have influenced, shaped and influenced the human behavior. They have changed the way people live and also respond to our environment. Globally, billions of people, billions of dollars have been spent in trying to mitigate or prevent and prepare for, to respond and also recover from the natural hazard and these disastrous events. Natural hazards have also resulted in economic loss and enormous social loss. The effects of a particular disaster, these depend on 3 pre-impact conditions. Let us now see what they are. They include the hazard exposure, physical and social vulnerability. There are also 3 event specific conditions. They include the hazard event characteristics, improvised disaster responses and improvised disaster recovery. Now, the communities can involve in 3 types of emergency management intervention to manage the disaster impact in a better way. Every community you will see, they have their own ways and strategies in order to respond to the disaster emergency and how to intervene in such situations. Social impacts. So, globally, if you see that the people are displaced by natural disasters more than conflict. Where will people go? Like, when you just find that in one place somebody, a group of people are practicing and doing agriculture, and there you find flooding and natural hazards or even earthquakes, and they lose all their housing, their property and also their lands, which is all affected. So, then millions of people are actually displaced. So, they need to migrate to other places for greener pastures in order to continue their survival and for their living. In the 1990s, natural catastrophes like the hurricanes, the floods and the fires, all this affected more than 2 billion people, and several $billion in economic losses have been incurred. So, why have all this occurred? Mainly because human beings, we have altered the natural systems, and also their ability to protect us from disturbances is greatly diminished. So, we are one main culprit for intervening with these calamities. Enormous expansion of the human population and the built environment, all this has put people and economic activities in the disaster prone areas. Even if you see the settlement, many of the people have settled along the floodplains, along the coastal sides. And so, when there is an impact, when there are hurricanes or when there are cyclones, then more and more people are displaced because of this event. Environmental and social impact. So, many people live within 100 kilometers of a coastline. Many of the world's mega cities, they live in the coastal zones. The effects of global warming, extreme weather events and sea level rise, all this will only magnify the potential losses. Now, there is another important thing that we need to understand, that these impacts fall disproportionately on the poor people, as they may live in the vulnerable areas and they have fewer resources to prepare and recover from such disasters. So, the only thing that they can think of is get the immediate relief if they are affected by their health for the emergency, and then move on to or migrate to different places and then continue their living. Now another example is the entire Mediterranean coast. This is also vulnerable for the sea level rise, and as the US Atlantic and the Gulf Coast. So all this is vulnerable to the environmental impacts, sea level rise and so on. Economic impacts. The property damage. This creates losses in asset values. For example, when an earthquake occurs, you have seen that there is enormous damage in the infrastructure, entire buildings. You have seen the Nepal earthquake and recently even earthquakes at Indonesia and Bali, which have quaked in 2018. So all this have caused severe economic impacts and losses, and the entire places, the property, the people, all they are displaced, they can be damaged, and the impacts are occurred, I mean the losses are occurred in $1 billion. One example, now the economic loss can be greater in the developed countries. The Kobe earthquake in Japan in 1995, this is supposed to be one of the costliest and expensive natural hazard disaster in history, and this incurred more than $100 billion US, making it one of the most expensive one. So economic loss as a result of disaster, this can be either direct or it could be indirect. The indirect effect are as a result of the direct effects. There can also be changes in the GDP per capita and increased cost of transportation. So all this, one after the other, they come in a chain or in a cyclic events, and then they can disturb the entire community. Now it is not only that people are impacted by the environmental, the social and the economic impacts. There are also the psychosocial impacts. So the disaster victims, when they are affected by the same, and you would have seen like even recently the floods in West Bengal. So there, the government, the NDMA and the local authorities, everybody has to come, they come together from the center, from the state and from the local, and also certain NGOs also come in order to help with the same. And the first aid is always given, people who have suffered some kind of burns, or if they are stuck under a building, then how they are taken out, and all their breathing pattern is restored to normal, and if any of the organs are affected or any of the limbs are cut, all this, the immediate medical intervention and the medical emergency, the staff are always on duty, they come to help. But later on, the people also have the psychosocial impacts, that is, they have some kind of the sleep disturbances, they can have appetite changes, and that is all because of the impact of that disaster. So this would have affected them mentally. They can have anxiety, and anxiety can actually cause gastrointestinal upset. They can have ritualistic behavioral problems. They can also have substance abuse and the drug intakes, or certain long forming the tablets that they take on a regular basis, and that can actually form habit forming drugs. The same way there could be attention deficit. So a person may not be where he is, but thinking of something else. And there could be confusion, there could be impaired concentration, there could be depression, and there could also be grief. Fatigue and other problems also occur. So psychosocial impacts also have a very big impact on people, and they are all the after effects of the hazard. Some disaster victims, they also require certain psychiatric diagnosis and benefits from the counseling and the orientation program. So if you have seen, there are special centers that are set up, and even the nurses and the workers and doctors, the psychological counselors, they all are there to help the victims from the same. And there are they can also go in the communities and take care of people. And in this, the special attention category people are also there. For example, there may be very young children, there can be old and elderly people, and the young also are at risk, because they are mentally, sometimes they are sensitive and they may not be prepared for such kind of disasters and events. They may not be mentally strong to tackle these events. And some people will have pre-existing mental illnesses which can aggravate in such cases. There can be racial and ethnic minorities who can face certain other problems. The families who have died in the disaster. So especially they need the counseling and orientation program so that they can benefit from the same and also recover and recoup from these disasters. So because of all these certain countries like Vietnam and China, they have understood that investing in the natural resources is one important aspect as to how they can actually protect themselves from the disasters and coastal storms. So in this figure, it is the mangrove tree that is seen, and Vietnam restored 2000 hectares of mangroves just to provide a buffer from the coastal storms. So these mangrove trees, you see that they are actually protecting the coastal communities, and they can actually help in the case of these severe coastal storms, and their roots are also, you can see how strong their roots are. So they are forming a buffer and they protect the coastal communities from the further damage. Forest and the flood control. So China is one example. They have now recognized that forests are more valuable for the flood control and water supply than for timber, and they have halted the logging, that is the in the Yangtze River watershed. So they halted this logging over there. Why? Because they incurred 85% of the forest loss in the upper Yangtze River after the 1998 flood, and this affected 223 million people. So one disaster made them realize that investing in natural resources is one important aspect, because they would actually provide you the flood control and give you the flood relief mechanisms. In the same way, in 2001, when Japan was struck by the tsunami, several car manufacturers, they had to close their factories in Europe as well as in the US. This was because the accessories and parts had to come from Japan and it had stopped. This impacted multiple supplies globally through the supply chain reaction, and this hit the global economy. So these are some examples of the economic losses that have occurred due to natural hazards and disasters. So dear learners, after listening to this module, you would have understood the effects and the impacts that are caused by the hazards, that is the primary effects, the secondary effects and the tertiary effects that are caused due to different hazards. We have given you examples from the earthquakes, and if the primary effect is the earthquake, what can the secondary and the tertiary effect that can occur? In the same way, floods or the landslides or even the volcanic activities. We also discussed about certain social and economic benefits, that is a positive and the environmental benefits that can be got from the that can be benefited by the disasters. For example, volcanic rich soils, and which could be even good for the crop and for the agriculture. In the same way, we also discussed the different impacts that can be caused due to the natural hazards. That may be the environmental impacts, the economic impacts, which was discussed with a few case studies from Japan, from China, from Vietnam, and what are the steps that they have taken in order to stop this economic loss. And we also discussed about the psychosocial impacts and the psychological problems that are encountered by people and the victims who have encountered these hazards and disasters, and who have also lost their lives in these natural hazards and also technological disasters. Thank you.